regarded as the mother of the civil rights movement, her heroic actions came with many harsh consequences that dramatically affected her daily life. She and her husband lost their jobs, endured poverty, publicate in the media, and moved several times. However, she never lost sight of her fight to overturn systematic racism and segregation in America. This is the story of Rosa Parks, an African-American woman utilizing public transportation who challenged the injustices of racial segregation by refusing to yield her seat to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama, highlighting her fight for individual rights and civic responsibilities on December 1st, 1955. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that segregation was constitutional, establishing the idea of separate but equal and setting the stage for many future disadvantages. Rosa Louise McCauley was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, to Leona and James McCauley. Her mother was a dedicated schoolteacher who constantly inculcated the importance of self-respect, faith, and education onto her daughter, as she did with her own students. These same values were fortified by Parks' grandparents and school teachers throughout her childhood. She was taught to believe in her values and to always stand up for what is right, something that became extremely important in her adult life. In addition to this, her family life growing up revolved heavily around religion, causing her strong faith to help form a basis for her future activism. In 1943, Rosa Parks officially joined the Montgomery NAACP, also known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a group whose mission is to ensure the educational and political equality of minority group citizens and to eliminate race prejudice. Eventually, she was elected the secretary of the Montgomery chapter and later founded the Montgomery NAACP Youth Council, traveling throughout the state of Alabama to interview victims of discrimination and to be witness to lynchings. Her travels were fueled by her past experiences observing and hearing of horrific atrocities when she was younger, including night rides by the KKK. She felt it her responsibility to get justice for the African Americans of her past by standing up for those of her future. On September 3, 1944, Reckie Taylor, a young black woman, was walking home when a car pulled up and 6 white men jumped out. Taylor was abducted and raped, then dumped out of the car blindfolded and bloody. She was able to stumble home, where she told her story to her family and the police sheriff. When questioned, the men said that they had paid for her sex and that it was consensual, so they went unconvicted. Despite many threats and acts of violence against her, Taylor felt that it was her responsibility to fight for justice. The NAACP sent a black woman who had also endured a sexual assault to help aid the process and spread the story. Her name? Rosa Parks. Parks assisted in getting Taylor's story public, resulting in a grand jury procedure. While none of the men were punished, it set the precedent for black women working together to fight for justice. Although they are silenced time and time again, they will eventually become successful and gain the rights they deserve. In November of 1952, Jeremiah Reeves, a 16-year-old African-American boy, was accused of raping a young white woman with whom he was having a consensual relationship with. He was arrested immediately. When Parks heard of this, she began to write letters, trying to organize a block of the execution. However, despite her protests, Reeves was executed at the young age of 22 years old. This blatant act of racism pushed Parks to set the many precedents that would be followed in the future cases, setting the stage for the civil rights movement to come. On December 1st, 1955, around 6 p.m., Parks boarded a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and sat in the 5th row, the colored section. She had just finished work as a seamstress and was on her way home. As more whites boarded, she was asked to move to the back. However, Parks refused to adhere to the driver's request and was arrested and removed from the scene by officers Day and Mixon. When questioned about why she did not move, Parks later stated,
"I felt I was being violated as a human being. I had had a hard day of work on the job, and I was physically tired as well as just mentally vexed and sick of this type of thing we had to endure as a people because of our race. It did not seem right, it wasn't right, and I felt that I was being mistreated."
The police report reads that she was convicted of disorderly conduct for, quote, refusing to obey orders of the bus driver, unquote. For this, Parks lost her job at the Montgomery Fair department store. She faced much public hatred and humiliation. Out of work and still fighting the oppression of African Americans in Montgomery, Parks dealt with poverty and many death threats to her and her family. Rosa had to make a bigger stand. On December 1st, 1956, she led the Montgomery bus boycott. It is important to note that the boycott was also invigorated by multiple other women such as Joanne Robinson and Claudette Colvin. While Colvin had a role, Robinson drafted and produced an important 35,000 copies of a pamphlet to target racist white bus drivers, which read, quote, "Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown in jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus for a white person to sit down. It is the second time since the Claudette Colvin case that a Negro woman has been arrested for the same thing. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too, for its Negroes did not ride the bus, they could not operate," unquote. The following day, black women and men walked to work, boycotting the transportation system. The boycott was a 13-month mass protest in which people refused to ride Montgomery public transit. This protest had a far reach of influence, so far, in fact, that it needed to be resolved at the federal level. As the boycott grew in size and in influence, it gained the attention of the Supreme Court. Affirmed Browder v. Gale was opened in February of 1956. The case was not directly linked to justice for Parks in order to keep its momentum. Instead, the issue was presented for segregation on public transportation and challenged the constitutionality of state statute. After many months of fighting in federal court and the dedicated involvement of Martin Luther King Jr., the ruling was released in December of 1956. Even after a state challenge to the ruling, buses in Montgomery were to be desegregated immediately. Segregation laws were deemed unconstitutional, marking the end of the 381-day Montgomery bus boycott. And giving African Americans the right to sit freely on public transportation, and, most notably, marking justice for Parks and Colvin, giving civil rights activists alike a huge victory. On July 2nd, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. This act prohibited discrimination on the basis of color, religion, sex, and national origin. The creation of this was a big moment because it generated many more rights for African Americans.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty, we are free at last!
Parks also worked in tandem with Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and many other influential rights activists to lead their community and exercise their rights. Although these figures did have disagreements, they all had one common goal: using the responsibilities on their shoulders to fight for equality. At the age of 92, Parks died from complications of progressive dementia. However, her legacy was not forgotten, as her body was allowed to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. Along with this, in 2006, a statue of her was placed in the National Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. Her achievements demonstrated how she found it in herself to keep fighting for the rights of African Americans, as she thought it was her responsibility to give back to her people. Rosa Parks, an African American woman utilizing public transportation, challenged the injustices of racial segregation by refusing to yield her seat to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama, highlighting her fight for individual rights and civic responsibilities on December 1st, 1955. As she once said, quote, "Differences of race, nationality, or religion should not be used to deny any human being citizenship, rights, or privileges," unquote.